He had Matsui's back,
And he pulled it out.
and Matsui got his hips up real high.
Hello everyone, and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. I'm Julian, and this is Matt.
Howdy.
Now, if this is the first time you're stumbling across this channel, you may be asking yourself, what is MMA Start to Finish? Well, we are a show that attempts to go back and watch every UFC, Pride, WEC, and Strikeforce event in chronological order. Presumably, this show will take us to our graves.
Probably. I don't think we're ever going to catch
We
up.
will end before the show does.
Yeah.
Today, we will be talking about Pride 3, held in the Nippon Budokan.
I think that's
correct?
right. Nippon Budokan.
The venue in Tokyo, Japan. Now, the last event we talked about was Pride 2, and in between us recording that and watching these fights, we have learned a pretty interesting historical fact about these early Pride events. Now, apparently, at the time of the recording for Pride 1 through the Grand Prix in 2000, there was no English commentary. So, in 1999, when Pride hired Bas Rutten and Steven Quadros, apparently they went back and recorded post-commentary for all of the Prides, having already known what would happen years later in the future. As a matter of fact, with that information, we're going to see some stuff today that makes that shit pretty obvious. As usual, these heavily edited broadcasts for Pride, we are thrown right into the fights immediately. In the first fight of the evening, we have Dejiro Matsui taking on the returning Akira Shoji. We've already met Akira on this show and gone through his interesting pre-Pride notes, and we went to see if there's much to learn about Matsui before his time in Pride, and other than the fact that he was a pro wrestler like most of the early Japanese MMA stars, not a whole lot. No sordid crimes we're unaware of to tell you about.
Nothing like
Seems like a stand-up guy.
crazy.
So early on, this fight seemed pretty interesting. There was actually some strikes thrown, unlike a lot of the fights we saw in Pride 2. Akira came out swinging. There was some grappling exchanges. Matsui kept shooting in for takedowns, even though after the first 2 or 3, it kind of became obvious he wasn't super proficient in that.
Yeah, they were too telegraphed for it to surprise Akira or get him down in any meaningful way.
And they were also way too slow.
Half the time he ended up, actually more than half the time, Matsui ended up on his back.
Yeah, he wound up getting sprawled by Shoji, and then from there Shoji would just circle around to his back where, to be honest, didn't really do a ton.
Yeah.
There was a theme tonight similar to the theme we saw in Pride 2, where once the guys were on the ground, they sort of decided that striking was too rude, apparently. Unless your name's Gary Goodridge, you don't punch people on the ground.
It felt like this was a quick... Nothing was quick about this. This was a transition from Pride 2 into, like, actual meaningful fights.
Fights that weren't the equivalent to watching paint dry.
Yeah.
If you don't know what we're talking about, normally I recommend and tell you to go back and listen to our last show and watch the event that goes along with it. But I cannot in good faith tell anyone to go back and watch Pride 2 unless you're a masochist.
Yeah.
Not exactly high-level entertainment.
Yeah. Now, this fight was 40 minutes, 4 rounds. I think that 4th round was an extra they just tacked on top.
Yeah, they gave like another 3 minutes after that too, I think.
Yeah.
Because the commentary, as usual, very confused about how many rounds this fight was, which I realized mid-fight made me pretty steamed considering y'all are watching it years later.
Yeah.
You have access to information. I imagine if you're recording the commentary for these fights, you can ask, I don't know, your employer how long the fucking fights were. It just struck me as so strange. Part of me thinks they were just trying to play it off as like, oh, we're live, we don't know what's going on. But even the live commentators should know the length of the fights. It was just dumb.
Now, we are harping on this a bit. It was a good technical fight. They were too evenly matched.
Yeah, that was it.
It was like fighting in Smash Bros. Against the same character that you're using.
It was a mirror match.
Yeah. Which commentary harped on that a lot too. That they're just too similar.
Hence the fight going 40 minutes, and we'll add taking up nearly half of the allotted time on Fight Pass for this card.
Yeah.
The runtime is a little over 100 minutes, and this fight was 40 minutes long.
45 if you count the time between rounds and the little intro.
The little intro before the fight.
Yeah.
Fun little tidbit about this fight that was very strange. Actually, two things about this fight that were very strange. In between rounds, I don't know what Soji's cornerman was doing, but like he put his finger in his mouth and he sucked his finger.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Now, Galaxy Brain Me thinks that they gave him cocaine.
They gave him some kind of stimulant.
Yeah.
There was energy on that finger.
I have nothing to back this up. This is just me talking
Allegedly.
out of my ass. Yeah.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. He put cocaine in Shoji's mouth.
Other thing that was very strange, at the end of the second round, the referee decided, you know what, Matsui? You're far too wet for me.
You're too sweaty.
You're not allowed to compete until you dry yourself off, sir.
They toweled
too moist.
They toweled him off.
So we haven't gotten too much into a certain guy dominating the fight one way or the other, because there really was no domination in this fight. Hence the 40 to 43 minute draw.
Yeah.
And there were no judges in Pride at this time, so
I feel like if we did have judges, it probably would have stayed a draw, but it might have gone for Akira.
Yeah, I think if you had to make an argument for somebody winning this fight, it would go to Shoji, just because he got the better of the few strikes that were exchanged on the feet, and he also didn't fail like 7 takedown attempts and get himself in a bad position.
Yeah. I mean, he was good on defense, too.
Now, if you're a student of these early MMA cards, you may recognize Immanuel Yarborough from UFC 3, where he was swiftly defeated by Keith Hackney. He has decided to go for one last fight in his MMA career, and he would make that appearance on Pride 3 against... I'm going to butcher this man's first name. I could say Takashi fine, but is that Daiju?
Yeah, sure. Daiju.
Takashi. We'll go with Takashi. I'm pretty confident in the last name there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have Immanuel Yarborough, the 6'8", 600-pound sumo wrestler fighting... They advertise here 6 foot, 209 pounds for Takashi.
He is not 209.
Yeah, Bas Rutten on commentary said he was 169 pounds.
This is a small man versus a gargantuan man.
This is truly David versus Goliath.
Yeah.
Now, this fight ranged from stupid to hilarious to upsetting to, oh God, he's going to kill him.
Yeah.
A lot of peaks and valleys in the Yarborough-Takashi fight.
Most of this was Takashi running around Immanuel.
Yeah. It was super obvious his only strategy was, let me make this giant dude tired. And he just ran around the ring for probably the first, 10 minutes?
Imagine a Dark Souls fight, but the boss can spin around a little faster.
Yo, complete with the dodge roll.
Yeah.
He did a somersault in the middle of the fight.
Yeah.
And the entire time, Immanuel just has this look on his face like, what are we fucking doing? What is this shit?
Let me punch you. Come here.
Takashi's stalling got so bad that we saw the first ever issuing of a yellow card in Pride history.
Which I didn't know was a thing.
Yeah, Matt didn't know that was a thing, so when he saw this soccer card get pulled out, he started laughing.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Pride they have yellow cards a warning. Instead of deducting a point like they would eventually do in the UFC, yellow cards a warning, and I believe your second yellow card got you disqualified.
You think it would just be a red card at that point?
Yeah. But that's the way it works in soccer, too. You get 2 yellow cards or a red card, and you're disqualified. I actually don't remember if they have, a red card to pull out for egregious circumstances. I imagine you wouldn't really need to, because you just wave the fight off.
This whole fight, I was begging for Takashi to just throw some head kicks, because jabs...
Or to do anything.
Leg kicks, none of that's going to work against this armored tank.
Certainly body shots are not a great tool in the toolbox.
No, they're just going to deform Immanuel a little bit and then go back to how he was. A 400-pound advantage does get you some armor.
Quite a bit. However, it doesn't necessarily earn you the best balance and coordination in the world.
No.
So after getting warned for stalling, Takashi decided, guess I'll die, and just shot in for a leg on Yarborough, tried to take him down, to which me and Matt both audibly yelped, "Oh my god!" And then Yarborough fell on top of him, to which we went, he's gonna kill him. It was terrifying, very briefly, until we realized that Immanuel was very low on the legs.
His arms were about up to Takashi's knees, which is not a great hold.
Yeah, and after using whatever energy he had left after following Takashi around the ring for about 12 minutes, he ran out of steam.
It's also just really hard to move around when you're that big. Like, natural movements to a normal-sized person, they're not doable for someone of his size. It's just, he can't even roll to the side, which, in this position that he's in, he could roll to the side and just overwhelm Takashi, but he just is. There's not enough muscle to do it. He's too heavy.
I should have noted this earlier on the topic of Yarborough being too large to roll. I can quote you, Matt, as saying during this fight, "That is wild. Those are both humans." No, that you're right.
Yeah.
That is wild. These are, if you were an alien and you came to this planet and you saw these two things next to each other and somebody was like, "Oh yeah, they're the same thing. They could mate." You'd be like, "What the fuck? What did you say to me?"
Imagine an elephant. Now imagine a hugely overweight elephant. You can't. It's not a thing.
There's not quite the same size differential in the animal kingdom.
Like
The discrepancy, rather.
The closest I can think of is like a really fat cat, but even they're still fairly mobile.
Honestly, the best analogy I can get to is dogs, because a Great Dane, in theory, could mate with like a Chihuahua.
I guess.
I mean, it like literally could.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things can
Well,
mate.
okay. Like it would produce like viable offspring.
I don't think these two could mate. I just think they don't have the equipment for it.
So after running on E for a couple minutes there, just holding on to Takashi's legs for dear life.
I feel like you can kind of see where this ends up.
Yeah, Takashi just realized, oh, I can just kind of move a little bit.
Yeah.
And from there proceeded to punch this large man until he tapped out.
Yeah.
You can actually see here in the screenshot we have him beginning to tap.
I think you can also see the ref's hand swooping in to stop it.
To save the day, if you will.
Yeah. And so ends Immanuel Yarborough's mixed martial arts career.
Yeah, we checked out Wikipedia to see if he had been up to anything else in terms of the MMA world since we last saw him at UFC 3. I did see one fight he had in there at the Shuto Federation in Japan before this Pride event in April of that year, but this battle against Takashi is his last entry. Before our next fight between Sakuraba and Carlos Newton, we would be treated to an in-ring promo by Bas Rutten in which they tried to play off that they were actually there by having Bas not talk on commentary while he was on the ring, and then when he got back to, air quotes, got back to the commentary desk after talking, said, "How did I look?" And you said he was still in the shot when he said that, "How do I look?"
He was talking while he was coming out. He was like, "Who's that fine-looking gentleman?" and whatnot.
That's in true Bas Rutten fashion.
Yeah.
Bringing life to the post-commentary art form.
Mm-hmm.
In that little promo, he told us that he's actually going to be fighting Randy Couture in the UFC. So, an announcement for a future show of ours.
And eventually Hicks and Gracie, he said.
That one wasn't scheduled, but he said after his contract with the UFC is presumably a one-fight deal back then, he'd like to come to Pride and fight Hicks and Gracie.
Oh, he'd like to fight him.
Yeah, it wasn't a done deal, but that's something he wants to do. And then once the translator said that in Japanese to the fans, they got real excited. Remember, Bas Rutten is a pretty big star in Japan given his success smashing people in Pancrase, the weird organization where you couldn't punch people, but you could shin them in the face. So as soon as this fight started, we saw Sakuraba throw out a leg kick. Now, don't let that kick deceive you. There would not be many strikes in the first 10 minutes or so of this fight.
Only at the beginning and towards the ending of this fight did we see many strikes.
For the duration of their grappling, which took up a lot of this fight, both of them trying to get back or trying to get an arm bar, they were really hesitant to strike on the ground. Which, I mean, it's obviously not against the rules.
Yeah.
But I guess it's like a point of, like, honor or politeness?
They're definitely both grapplers.
Yeah, and I guess they respect that to some extent.
Yeah. Just not their strong suit, so they didn't want to mess with it too much.
Now, I mentioned those arm bars. Sakuraba came very close early in this fight to getting an arm bar, but Carlos was able to shake him off.
And the usual Sakuraba fashion, yeah, he just wants arm bars.
If he's playing a video game, he's just spamming the same move over and over again.
Yeah.
Eventually, Sakuraba did throw a strike while they were on the ground, and from there tried to get some kind of leg lock. And you can see after that happened, Carlos internalized, oh, I guess we're going to strike now, because from there, he kneed him in the body several times. And Sakuraba had to get out of that back-mounted position. And guess what he did when he tried to escape? Attempted another armbar.
Yeah.
Came really close again.
Bas Rutten and I were both constantly looking for more strikes because there was plenty of opportunity for them.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't like they were in some really close clinch or like the guy's head was being held down. They just were actively choosing to not strike at all.
Yeah. And that knee, if it's the knee I'm thinking of from Carlos, he could have thrown in a few more of those without any worry.
He like threw the first one, and then you see him think about it, and then he threw another one, and then he waited a while, or too long rather, and Sakuraba had already transitioned out of that position.
Yeah. And Carlos was on Sakuraba's back, so it's a pretty dominant position.
The best way to describe Carlos's back play is indecisive.
Yeah.
He didn't really go for strikes. He didn't really commit to a choke. He didn't even really commit to being compact to Sakuraba's back. He was kind of leaning back there at a certain point, and that would be his downfall, as from that point, with the room he had, Sakuraba just grabbed up a knee bar, and Newton would be forced to tap or see his ACL go bye-bye.
Not an arm bar, still bar.
Still a bar of some kind for Sakuraba.
I feel like if we see Sakuraba some more, which I expect we will, the people he's fighting, they've got to have some idea that, oh, he loves arm bars. Defend against that.
And to this point, outside of his fights in the UFC against Conan Silveira, we haven't really seen him face somebody who's a willing striker.
Yeah.
And even Conan, he wasn't a striker. He was a Vale Tudo guy, so he was sort of well-rounded and was a grappler too. I'd like to see him in Japan fight, I don't know. Give him to Bronco, see what happens. It'll at least be entertaining. In this next fight, we would see the return of a man this show is a very big fan of.
It's Daddy.
It's Big Daddy, Gary Goodridge.
Daddy.
Apparently, this poor man he was fighting fought him on I can't quite remember if Steven Quadros said a day or a week's notice. Either way, kind of fucking insane.
Yeah.
Especially, they also said he hadn't fought in 6 months, which now is like a normal, sane time to take off from fights. But in the 90s, you saw these guys fighting like 8 times a year, insane shit like that.
And in those 6 months, you're usually training to fight the guy you know you're fighting.
Yeah.
Whereas this, it's like, oh, we're fighting now.
He was just like playing billiards and got the call for Gary in Japan. Now, immediately, this fight starts off with Gary's trademark power as he throws some pretty vicious uppercuts to begin things, until Amir goes for some weird hip toss, but doesn't quite get all the momentum going into it that he wants. And then he winds up landing on his own back, and Gary is on top position.
It probably doesn't help that Gary's 40 pounds heavier.
Yeah, there's these guys are not exactly the same even strength matchup we saw with Soji and Matsui earlier. Now, while Gary had top position on Amir, Steven Quadros forgot what his job was for a brief moment in time and went off into an anecdote about how when he was working for a kickboxing magazine, he got a call from Amir about having to fight Gary. And then Steven said that he called him after the fight that we're watching right now and told him he lost.
Yeah.
He spoiled the fight in the middle of the fight. And then there was the most awkward 3 seconds of dead air I've ever experienced in my life. And Bas Rutten said,
They have to cut that out. You're right here.
just
This is the fight.
the oddest brain fart of all time.
And they didn't even cut it out.
No, of course they didn't. They probably expected like less than 8 people to ever actually watch this. Now, if you thought time-traveling Steven Quadros was the weirdest thing about this fight, you are sorely mistaken. While Gary was on top in Amir's guard, Amir decided, I should throw some strikes from my back, maybe for posterity perhaps. Gary did not take very kindly to these strikes.
Amir striking.
Gary just started yelling at Amir,
Gary saying
calling his punches child's play.
Child's play.
Just telling him, come on, hit me again.
Again. Again. Again.
Again. Harder.
And eventually wooing like Ric Flair.
Woo! Woo! Woo!
Just the oddest sequence I've ever seen before a knockout, probably in any fight.
It was like Frank Shamrock's mocking
Of Bas Rutten?
but vocally.
Yeah, a lot more intense.
Yeah. And Amir's continuing to hit Gary, but it's not doing anything.
Eventually, Gary decides it's time to nail home the point and hammers Amir. It sounded even worse than it looked, which is saying a lot because it looked pretty bad. But the thud from Gary's hammers was disconcerting, and thankfully the Pride referees were not quite as late as they are sometimes and got in there in a pretty reasonable time frame.
One thing that commentary pointed out was that Gary doesn't punch like how most people are trained. He doesn't punch like moving with his hips. He just punches using only his arm. And these 3 or 4 punches knocked out Amir. I'm wondering how much more power he would have if he actually followed through with like a full punch.
The power of Pride's drug testing program.
Or
Gary
lack
could
thereof.
take all the Flintstones gummies he wanted, and he would have no USADA official knocking on his door at 5 a.m. to take a urine sample. There was none of that in Pride. Fresh off his controversial squabble with Bronco Sikatich at Pride 2, Mark Kerr would return to take on Pedro Ottavio in the co-main event for Pride 3.
Now in this picture, just looking at their pictures, you'd think Ottavio is the bigger man. He's not. Kerr is very compact.
Very dense human, Mark Kerr. And I mean that not in the rude way. I mean in the, your mass is dense. Early in this fight, Gary would show us some... That's not Gary. We already talked about Gary.
Gary would jump in the ring.
Gary returned for violence. Early in this fight, Mark would show us some of the new tools he's learned, throwing some kicks, both to the legs and to the head early.
Yeah, he was mixing it up.
For a wrestler, decent looking stand-up. But he was a wrestler and would quickly take Pedro down. By the way, perhaps we shouldn't call him Pedro. Apparently his nickname is The Pedro.
The Pedro.
So a very important Pedro.
The first Pedro.
Of all Pedros.
Yes.
The patriarchal Pedro, if you will. After taking Pedro down, Mark was able to grab a hold of one of those arms and crank it behind Pedro's back and put him in a Kimura. Now, this would be the end of the fight. Did Pedro actually tap?
Well, there seems to be no question that Kerr had the submission, boss.
Oh my God, he was screaming.
the referee stepped in because he screamed in pain.
Yeah.
We may not have included it in that little clip there, but before the referee stepped in, Pedro yelped like, I don't know, his arm had been snapped,
Yeah.
which is about as close to a verbal tap you can get, especially when you consider the language barrier. If you scream in pain as an official and I don't speak your language, I'm kind of going to step in there and end the fight.
Yeah. He
was pissed about it.
very pissed. And he kept wagging his finger.
No! No, like Caesar from fucking Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
No! No!
I can understand why he's mad, but dude, your arm's about to break and you're screaming in pain. You gotta know what's happening.
You gotta protect yourself at all times, and while Pride may not have used the verbiage intelligently defending yourself, getting your arm cranked behind your back while you scream doesn't exactly shout, I'm intelligently defending myself.
Yeah.
Up next, we have a dubious fight. A fight that will go down, or has gone down, in infamy. Of course, we are talking about the famed, or I guess infamous, Nobuhiko Takata, Kyle Sturgeon fight as the main event of Pride 3. Both the debut and retirement bout in MMA for Kyle Sturgeon. Now, for those of you that don't know, there's very credible allegations that this was a fixed fight.
You don't say.
And if you watch the fight, especially if you already know that, it's kind of pretty obvious. The first weird-ass thing about this fight is the response to kicks. Takata went flying around the ring like he'd been shot when he blocked the brunt of Sturgeon's kicks.
Yeah.
It looked like weird pro wrestling overselling. Because it kind of was.
Even pro wrestling looks better than that.
Yeah. You know, I want to say not exactly a seasoned performer, but that's not true. Takata is a world-famous pro wrestler. You'd think he'd be able to sell these strikes a little more believably. Apparently not. And that was not the only weird thing that happened in this fight. There was a point where Kyle took Takata down and then just kind of let him up.
Yeah.
With basically no resistance.
No. And this entire time, Kyle's just like bouncing around like he's on meth. He's super excited.
Yeah, if you I used to watch a lot of pro wrestling when I was younger, and the posture these guys were taking, their like bouncy nature and their floaty arms looked way more like two dudes about to engage in some graps than two dudes about to fight each other.
Yeah. It was like Mortal Kombat's standing still.
Idle motion.
Yeah. But more active.
Even on commentary, Bas and Steven said, is this his style? It's kind of weird. Bouncing around. Also, I will say, I'm fairly certain that on some level, especially given the fact that it happened years later, Bas and Steven, they knew this was a fixed fight.
At least Bas.
At least Bas knew.
Yeah.
I also know that Bas knew about some of the fixed fights, because not to spoil a future episode, but in another fight with Takata, Bas Rutten has gone on record as saying that he knew about the finish before it would happen and told it to reporters that the fight would end X way and that it ended X way. So Bas was clued in to some of the early shenanigans in Pride. I'd imagine he at least had a clue what was going on. Now, how does this bullshit fight end?
Takata shot at Kyle, gets in his guard,
Little to no resistance.
and manages to snake his way over to getting a heel hook on Kyle.
Sure. A heel hook.
Yeah. And, well, Kyle taps, and we don't see it here, but in the slow motion replay, we can actually see Kyle, as soon as he's getting stuck in this heel hook, starts raising his hand flat out like he's ready
Like
to
he's
tap.
about to tap like a pro wrestler.
Hesitates, puts it back into a fist, and realizes, like, oh, I gotta make this struggle look real.
He's like, should I do this now? Let me wait. Let me chill.
And then taps a second or two later.
Shady all around. The Japanese crowd didn't seem to mind or notice. Their hometown hero had won the main event. They erupted in cheers. and another weird Pride card would end. Eventually, I promise, Pride does get better than the UFC.
Does that mean ladders?
It does not mean ladders, but that does mean pyro, a little too much pyro.
Okay. So I think for this fight, obviously, it was fixed. You know? Yeah. And they're taking their pro wrestling backgrounds into this. But maybe they should have coordinated it a little better. Or choreographed it.
Yeah. It looked like they were just making this shit up as they went along.
Yeah.
Or they hadn't actually thought about, especially Takata, the way he sold those kicks. It didn't seem like he'd thought about what in between of pro wrestling and MMA he was going to use to sell that. Because he went like full pro wrestling sell, and you could tell, kind of realized, oh, I shouldn't maybe go that far, and then like toned it back a little bit for the next kick.
Yeah.
It was a mess.
Pro Wrestling 100, 50%. Let's keep it to 25% after that third kick or so.
And you can see them try and artificially extend the grappling exchanges, because before that and again, large air quotes, leg lock attempt, nobody did anything. They didn't even try to guard pass. You just saw them sit in the position and rock around. A lot of fake motion, like you would see in pro wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Very weird fight, if you want to call it that. Hopefully you enjoyed Pride 3. We sort of did. It was a beautiful disaster. Next time on the show, we're keeping things here in Japan, covering the great Pride 4. Until then, thank you guys for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. Leave a comment telling us what you thought of this obviously fixed fight.
Yeah.
And the rest of this rather insane card. So until then, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you later.
Bye. We love you.
1 and 2 wrestling.
I don't want to see that win.
Yeah. Read the method of victory for me.
Submission.
Did you read the submission?
No. I want to see it more now.